The night I heard the clock, I thought it was inside me. A rhythmic tick, too steady to belong to dreams. The sound came from her room, the door half closed. Light leaking through the narrow seam like a whispered confession. My stepmother's breathing matched the rhythm perfectly. As if she were keeping time with something unseen. Father had been gone 3 weeks on what he called a conference. Which meant distance wrapped in good grammar. I walked past her door every night. Not out of curiosity but because the hallway itself seemed to ask for witnesses. On the 4th night the ticking changed speed. And that's when I realized it wasn't the wall clock at all, it was her wristwatch. The one with the thin gold frame and a crack across the face. It was still on her wrist while she slept. As if she feared time would escape if she let it rest. I stood there longer than I should have. Watching the faint reflection of my silhouette in the glass of the door. My heartbeat sinking with the sound. The glass house never allowed silence to stay pure, even dreams here had echoes. In the morning she came down to breakfast with her hair still damp from a restless night. Her blouse neatly buttoned, her voice even. "You didn't sleep," she said, pouring coffee into the chipped porcelain mug I always used. "Neither did you," I answered. She smiled like someone rehearsing regret. "The house keeps hours of its own." She was right. The clocks in the house never agreed. The one in the dining room ran 7 minutes slow, the one in the hall 4 minutes fast. And the one on her wrist, always exact. Father used to say she set it by heartbeats, not seconds. But after he left, I began to think she was setting it by guilt. I caught her once, late in the afternoon, winding it counterclockwise. "You'll break it," I said. "Or reverse something." "Maybe that's the point," she murmured. Eyes fixed on the second hand circling backward like a rewind that refused to end. Days blurred. The air grew heavy with unspoken things. She spent hours near the large window facing Sable Street, where rain turned the glass into a slow river of light. I watched her reflection move in it, graceful, deliberate, detached. Sometimes she whispered names I couldn't hear. Sometimes she said mine. When the letter arrived from Whitlock Registry, stamped and unsigned, she placed it beside my coffee without explanation. It was a notice of property transfer. Father had listed her as sole executor of the glass house. I waited for anger, but what came instead was the familiar ticking from her wrist. "He trusts you," I said. "He's testing me," she corrected. Trust is too clean a word. That night the ticking followed me into my dreams. I saw the house inverted, hanging in a reflection of itself. Its walls made of transparent sleep. Every clock within it was broken, yet time still moved, dragging us with it. When I woke, the watch lay on the table beside my bed. I hadn't touched it, yet the glass crack had deepened, like a line advancing through ice. I turned it over and saw something engraved faintly on the back, her initials, and below them a date that wasn't hers. It was mine. I went to her room, but it was empty. The bed was made, the pillow smooth, no imprint of sleep. Only the faint scent of her perfume remained, and on the dresser, a folded note in her precise handwriting. "If the clock stops, listen. You'll know whose heartbeat it borrowed." Outside, the rain began again, steady, patient. The glass house gleamed like it was remembering something. I wound the watch once, gently, and pressed it to my ear. The tick returned, slower, softer, but still alive. And in that fragile rhythm I heard her breathing, steady as guilt. The house seemed to lean closer to listen. And when the sound faded, I realized I was the one keeping time now. We ate breakfast in almost perfect silence, the kind that looks like peace from a distance. The ticking followed us into the kitchen, faint but certain, hiding behind the clink of spoons and the hum of the refrigerator. She poured coffee with one hand, the other resting on her wrist as if guarding it. The cracked glass of the watch caught the pale morning light and split it into a dozen fragile lines across the table. You wind it every day, I said. You'd think it could rest sometimes. It doesn't like rest, she replied, without looking up. Some things lose rhythm if you let them stop. The glass house reflected us from every angle, two figures repeating a meal we didn't taste. Every motion mirrored in soft delay. I wondered if the reflections were getting slower or if we were. The rain outside had paused, leaving the city washed and uncertain. From the hallway came the faint echo of another clock. The one Father had brought from Marin Point. Still 5 minutes fast, as if running ahead to escape something. Do you ever miss him? I asked. She stirred sugar into her coffee, though she never drank it sweet. The sound, sometimes. Not the man. The sound? She tapped the table once with her fingernail. He had a way of closing doors that made the air jump. It reminded me I was alive. I looked at her, at the stillness she carried like armor. You talk about him like he's dead. He's not, she said, but silence kills slower, doesn't it? The watch ticked louder for a moment, as though answering her. She lifted it to her ear, eyes closing briefly, and smiled faintly. Still working, she murmured, as if that proved something none of us could name. When she opened her eyes again, her reflection in the glass door lingered half a second too long, moving after her like it refused to agree she'd left. I noticed her hand tremble just once as she set the cup down, the sound small and deliberate. That's when I began to wonder if the ticking I heard at night wasn't from the watch at all, but from her, measuring herself against the silence she'd learned to survive. That afternoon I found her in the study, standing near the large window that looked over the wet slope of Alder Rise. The glass caught the gray light and turned her reflection ghost pale, so that I couldn't tell if she was inside or already gone. The ticking filled the room like a slow leak. On the desk lay open folders from Whitlock Registry, thin sheets of paper stamped with my father's name, lines of ink that looked like veins. He left you the house, I said quietly. She didn't turn. He left me the sound, she replied. The house was always yours. Then why do I feel like a guest? Because you're still waiting for permission to stay. Her voice was calm, practiced, almost kind. The clock on her wrist kept its rhythm, steady as judgment. He used to say I made time behave, she added. But I never did. I just listened until it obeyed. She turned then, and in her eyes was a glint I couldn't read, something between grief and accusation. You think I wanted this? She asked. The house, the echoes, his absence measured in hours? I wanted to tell her that I didn't think anything anymore. That the ticking had erased thought and replaced it with memory. Do you hear it too? I asked. Always, she said. Even when I sleep. Especially then. The rain began again, fine and nervous, tapping against the glass like fingertips. What if it stops? I said. She looked at me as if I'd said something cruel. Then I'll stop, she answered simply. There was no drama in her tone, just a plain truth worn thin by repetition. I walked closer, close enough to see the small crack in the watch's face. The line that divided the 12 like a scar. You could replace it, I said. There are newer ones. Newer ones don't remember, she said. They only count. I wanted to touch her wrist, to feel the heartbeat behind the ticking. But my hand stayed suspended in the air, uncertain whether to reach or retreat. "He'll come back," I said, though the words sounded like someone else's hope. She shook her head. "He already has." This is what coming back looks like, people repeating their sentences until they mean something different. The rain grew heavier. Somewhere in the house, another clock answered hers, half a beat behind, as if mocking the idea of perfect time. For a moment, both sounds aligned, and in that alignment, I thought I heard his voice, or mine. Or maybe just the echo of what the house had decided to keep. The next evening the house dimmed early, its glass walls catching the blue of the approaching storm. She was in the dining room again, laying out 2 plates, though neither of us had eaten properly in days. The watch on her wrist clicked softly against the rim of the glass as she moved. "It's slowing down," she said without looking up. "I can feel it." Her voice sounded almost relieved, as though time's exhaustion might finally set her free. I stepped closer, watching the rain blur her reflection in the window until she looked doubled, both present and dissolving. "Maybe it just needs rest," I said. She shook her head. "Rest is what breaks things like this. Rest makes them forget their duty." She set the watch on the table between us. Up close it looked more fragile than ever, the crack along the glass deeper now, the second hand trembling as it moved. "He gave it to me the night we moved here," she said. "He said as long as it ticked, we'd never lose our way in this house." "And did you?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "We lost much more than that." The watch faltered again, its rhythm staggering like a breath too shallow. "What happens when it stops?" I asked. She looked up at me, eyes pale in the reflected light. "Then this house will finally tell the truth." For a moment, the ticking ceased. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was thick, waiting. I could hear the rain stutter against the window, the low hum of electricity inside the walls. Even the small sound of her pulse beneath the skin. "You hear it too, don't you?" she whispered, the house remembering. I nodded because I did. It was faint but insistent. A deep interior rhythm that didn't belong to either of us. The air felt charged, as though every reflective surface had begun to record our movements. "He used to say mirrors are promises," she said, tracing the edge of the table with her finger. "They show you what you swore not to become." "And what did you swear?" "To stay," she said. "But promises lose their meaning when the person they're for stops listening." She picked up the watch and turned it over. I saw something etched on the back for the first time. A tiny inscription of her initials followed by a single word, "Witness." She closed her fingers around it, her knuckles whitening. "Do you think he hears it now?" I asked. "He doesn't have to," she said. "It's his silence that winds it." Then she lifted the watch to her ear and smiled faintly, almost tenderly, before setting it down again. The second hand began to move on its own. Outside, thunder rolled across the ridge, and the house shivered as though something had been decided. The storm passed sometime after midnight. The air turned thin and sharp, carrying the smell of wet leaves and metal. I found her in the hallway, standing by the window that faced the port. The sky beyond was pale blue, not dawn yet. Just the kind of light that mistakes itself for forgiveness. She held the watch loosely in her hand. "It wasn't ticking. It stopped," I said. "Yes," she replied, and her voice was calm, almost lighter. "Do you hear that?" The silence pressed close around us, not absence, but presence stripped of disguise. Every sound the house once made was gone. No hum from the vents, no soft creak from the glass joints. Nothing but our breathing and the faint drip of water from the eaves. I think it's what he wanted, she said. To leave something that never outlived him. But it outlived you, I said quietly. Maybe that's the same thing. She placed the watch on the windowsill. The cracked face caught a thread of light from the harbor and returned it in fragments. Like it couldn't decide which piece was the truth. You could keep it, I offered. No. You should. It always measured your hours too, she said, brushing her hand against mine. Her skin was cold but steady. Every second I wound it backward was a second I borrowed from you. I wanted to tell her that I understood. But words sounded cheap in that kind of stillness. The glass house felt aware, its walls dimming slightly as if lowering their eyes. Outside, the rainwater along Sable Street glimmered gold from the streetlights, flowing like a vein back into the city. She turned away from the window, her reflection remaining a heartbeat longer before fading. What happens now? I asked. Now the house will stop listening, she said. And you'll learn what silence really means. She walked toward the stairwell, her steps unhurried, deliberate. When she reached the landing, she paused, looking down at the mirrored floor where our shapes had once overlapped. Every clock stops, she said. But some keep echoing. Then she descended, her image breaking apart in the reflections like falling light. I stayed by the window, watching the port lights flicker through the mist. The watch lay still, its cracked glass breathing faint reflections of the city. I thought I heard it stir once, a phantom tick, then nothing. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full, heavy, final. I didn't move. I only listened. The window remembered what we denied. And that's when I knew. Her silence was still keeping time.